the Israeli state and its policies towards the Palestinians, and this can be proved, had increased anti-Semitism, did not decrease anti-Semitism. The insistence of Israel that Zionism and Judaism are the same allowed a lot of anti-Semites to say, well, what Israel is doing is Jewish. So even if you are a Jew in London who has nothing to do with Israel, you are a Zionist by default because you are a Jew. Well, I think you meet a traumatized Jewish society there, not entirely sure about the horizon, still deeply divided between what I used to call recently the state of Judea, namely those who are behind the messianic Zionism that the new political forces in power are bringing with them. So they are more confident that they are in an historical moment that would unfold in a positive way, where Israel would complete the takeover of Palestine, would become a power that deters everyone around them. So you have that section of the society who probably are less frightened, are less traumatized, and are more convinced that they are part of a big historical story, and they are playing a very positive part. I would say that the vast majority, not the vast majority, but I think more than 50% are feeling insecure, even if they are not directly affected by missiles coming from Lebanon, Iran, Jordan, Iraq, or recently from the Yemen. The fact that every now and then they have to rush to a shelter because of the sirens, when it is a daily affair, it accumulates. And more worrying for them, I think, is not so much the experience of the bombing, but rather the lack of future, the lack of horizon. They could sort of ask themselves, all right, let's say this is a difficult period, but maybe something more positive is awaiting us. And they can't hear from their own leaders. Most of them would be in the opposition. The more reasonable Israeli Jews would be in the opposition, would not be part of the government. But even those leaders don't have any very positive vision for the future. They keep telling them this is life, and that's how life is going to be for 20, 30, 40 years, God knows. Cycles of war that Israel has to win, not allowed to lose. And not surprisingly, the last statistics we saw a few days ago of 600,000 Israelis who already left, emigrated, 100,000. All of them, by the way, from that group of people who would have voted for more central, liberal Zionist parties, people with dual nationality, mainly European Jews, and people with jobs that they can reignite elsewhere. And that is not because they are morally depressed by the way Israel treats the Palestinians, or they are worried about the implications of the genocide. It's just thinking about their children and grandchildren, asking themselves, is this a place to be in when we have options? Of course, there are many Israeli Jews who came from Arab and Muslim countries who don't have dual nationality and don't have that many options outside. But one should say they're also more supportive of the current political forces in a very ironically way, in a way that would be much more catastrophic for them than for the Jews who can leave. But that's another story maybe. So this is the mood among the public. Among the politicians, you have this the current government made of almost to the last minister of people who believe that they are at the middle of an historical, I call it a historical window, or a window of opportunity to change dramatically the reality, not only in historical Palestine, but in the Middle East, by power, by force. That yes, it is costly, it is dangerous, but it's worth the effort. And I think some of them genuinely believe in it. Some of them, like Netanyahu, don't believe in anything but think that this kind of, ideology will keep him in power. He's a political survivor more than an ideologue. And they are hoping, I think, that Donald Trump would be elected in the United States, would make it easier for them. They are allied to all the right-wing parties in the West, to Modi in India. So you have this current political and military elite that thinks that it got over the trauma of the 7th of October, reinstated the military as a powerful tool in the area, and now it's time to use it to create more conducive conditions in the future. What I'm trying to say is that a lot of Israeli Jews don't share this confidence, do not rejoice at this scenario, and yet don't have any political leaders that offer an alternative, and therefore it's difficult to see how this government would be toppled or would dramatically lose in the next election, 2026.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. God knows how the exchange of blows between Israel and Iran would, unfold. It's a bizarre exchange. If you look at it objectively, not one Iranian was killed in this exchange, not one Israeli was killed. The only people who are being killed in large numbers are Palestinians and Lebanese. And yet, if you look at the headlines in the newspaper, it says Iran and Israel are at war. It's a very bizarre war if nobody's hurt. There are no casualties between Iran and Israel in this regional war, which makes you think a little bit about this, to my mind, this whole regional war, scare is serving Israel very well, serving the United States very well. It distracts us from the real issue, which is an international immunity for the genocide of the Palestinians and the genuine Israeli attempt to wipe out the Palestinians as a people and as a country. And the more you talk about a regional war, the more you talk about the danger of an escalation, the less you will talk about what Israel is doing, not only in the Gaza Strip, but also in the West Bank and to its own Palestinian citizens. It was always the fate of Palestine that in order to allow Israel actually, sometimes inadvertently, unintentionally, allowing Israel to do what it does to the Palestinians by claiming that there's a bigger question, there's a bigger picture. There's no bigger picture. It's the same picture for 120 years. A European solution for a European problem at the expense of the Palestinians that should have failed long time ago, but succeeds despite the Palestinian resistance, but maybe is entering its final stage. Who knows? We might talk about it a bit later. But first of all, I will answer that directly. I just want to say one more point on Iran. I don't know many cases in history where you had what you saw a week ago. The United States sort of negotiating with Iran and Israel, where will Israel hit in Iran? Talking about, this catastrophic regional war. There's a lot of game playing here. But coming back to your very important question, yes, it is. There are several indications, which I call cracks in the structure that is called the State of Israel, that are already extensive, but have become more extensive after the Hamas attack on the 7th of October 2023. One of these indications is the Israeli mass immigration, not so much because of the number, but because of who these people are. They form an important part of the economic elite, the cultural elite. So yes, in a way, it serves the Likud well in electoral terms, but in the long run, this is part of an elite or human capital that the state would need in order to thrive and to deal economically, I would say even militarily, with the challenges that is ahead of it. Not to mention the fact that we are talking of some of the more affluent Israelis, the high-tech elite, that are not just moving themselves out of the country, they're moving the capital out of the country. And this was already noticed by Moody and S&P, those international firms that decide whether a country is worth investing in or not. And Israel was kept being downgraded as an unsafe investment destination. So yes, it is connected. It's not the only process or not the only symptoms of that disintegration of a state. No less important is the lack of social cohesion. The secular and the religious Jews in Israel find it very difficult to find a common ground. This is not anymore, it's not even Brexit of Britain. The depths of hate, mistrust, and occasional clashes. It's deteriorating very fast into a proper civil war. So it's not just I talked about Brexit because you can have a very rough period where people really disagree and families can, torn apart, but this is much more than that. So that's another indicator. The fact that the Jewish communities in the world, especially the young ones, do not see themselves as Zionists anymore, do not see Jewish identity as necessarily connected to Zionism. That's a new phenomenon, especially in the United States, especially among the younger generation. The international isolation of Israel has been increased as well. Its economic, I already mentioned, economic situation. It will be totally relying now on American financial aid like never before. And I'm not sure that the invincibility of the army has been proven to be maintained. Even that is a bit iffy right now. So if you take all these processes together, they might be discrete, disconnected, but they can fuse into one explosive point in the future. So I'm not thinking about the next few years. I'm talking about long-term processes that can mature in 15, 20 years' time, but it will not be the only failed state in that area. Syria is a failed state, disintegrating now for God knows more than 12 years. Yemen is disintegrating as a state. Libya doesn't exist anymore as a state. Lebanon and Iraq are in a very precarious moment in their history. So that is not surprising that Israel and Palestine are part of it. Probably the only stable states right now are the monarchies, but monarchies by themselves, the raison d'etre of monarchies is that they're never safe, especially absolute monarchies are never safe. So the area as a whole is conducive for collapses, such as the one that I think we are already witnessing, but it's very slow motion now. It hasn't accelerated yet, but can happen. First of all, let's state the fact that Israel does not control all of Israel anymore. 120,000 Israelis don't live in the north. The north is a kind of a battlefield with burning houses, burning fields, burning natural reserves. The few people who stay there do not receive any of the basic services that they need. A similar situation is still around the Gaza Strip. So first of all, you have sections of your own organic society that are not functioning normally for more than a year. They're living in hotels. They may share dwellings with their relatives and so on, but they are refugees, something Israelis have never experienced before. So that's one indication for a state that something is not normal. In other parts, I can tell you in the north, in Haifa, in the area where I live, not far from Haifa and so on, it's not easy to get the usual services anymore. But that might be temporary. Maybe some sort of a political solution between Israel and Hezbollah would be achieved, and then maybe that part of the sense that the state is also not functioning in other parts, apart from Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, may change. I have to say this, but definitely in the last 4 months or so, the sense is that also these parts of Israel, so altogether we're talking now more than 50% of the state, is not, you cannot live a normal life. Economically, socially, culturally, kids don't go to school, basic services are not there. Every now and then they try to convince parents to go to send the children, but they're not totally feel safe, the parents, to do so. It's a very, it's a state in a crisis. The vibe is a crisis, but again, I have to stress that it's very important to understand you really have two Israels. I call it, you have the state of Judea and the state of Israel. You really have two states in one state. The state of Israel reacts basically normally to that situation. What is a normal reaction to a situation of war? Many people, first of all, leaving. That's normal. Many people feel depressed and traumatized. That's normal. Many people hope that the end of the fighting is near. The state of Judea rejoices. This is Armageddon. This is what we always thought should happen and would happen. So it's difficult to generalize about the mood when you have two peoples, so to speak, living in the same place. What is really for me sad as an Israeli who was involved in politics for many, many years, especially among the Palestinian citizens of Israel, if the Israeli center and left would not have been racist, they could have formed an alliance with the Palestinian citizens of Israel and become a formidable electoral force. But their racism prevents them from collaborating with the Palestinian citizens who are willing to work with them. But that is not working. That is not on the table. And therefore, there's very little hope for change from there. No, I think the process we are watching is the state of Judea swallowing the state of Israel. No, I don't think there will be a state of Israel. I think there will be a state of Judea. And that's why I think in the long run, that state is not a viable project. No, I don't think so. I think that this is something that even for those who now feel totally committed to Israel and ignore the genocide in Gaza, ignore what's happening in Lebanon, keep telling themselves that Israel are the good guys, so to speak, despite some criticism that they have, all these actors in the region and on the international arena that provide Israel with an exceptional immunity would find it very difficult to grant that same immunity to the state of Judea. They will find it more difficult. I'm not saying there won't be people like, the Christian Zionists in America, the fascists in Europe. They will have allies, but they will have the alliance that keeps Israel alive would be downsized dramatically if I'm right that the state of Judea becomes the future of Israel. And that decreased alliance or smaller alliance wouldn't have the power to sustain it, to my mind. And that's a process that I'm thinking of, that I think that I'm watching, actually, not thinking of. This is not about wishful thinking. I'm trying to say to people, I said in one lecture in the Arab world that I think we are seeing the beginning of the end of Israel. And one of the Jordanian important newspapers had the headline was Professor Pappé says that Israel has ended. So I have to be careful. I didn't say Israel has ended. I'm just saying that there is a process, which, by the way, I think should be the conversation. Even if you dread this vision, even if you're afraid that this bodes very badly for the Jews who live in Israel, or maybe for the Jews in the world, even if you're afraid of it, not only hoping for it, we should have that conversation instead of the two-state solution. Instead of the agenda that the international community thinks is the right agenda for the day after, I think the right agenda for the day after, whether you like it or not, is the end of the Zionist project and what replaces it. I do agree. I think the existential threat for Israel comes from within, not from without. And by the way, this is not just the ultra-Orthodox Jews or Orthodox Jews. It's a weird alliance that now sustains this vision of the state of Judea. You have The Orthodox Jews, not all of them, as we know, there's a stream, Neturei Karta, who are anti-Zionist and are very loyal to the struggle for freedom in Palestine. We should mention them and not include them in this group of people. And you have the settlers, who are national religious, growing in numbers, 700,000 in the last account. And what is really depressing, they are winning a new constituency among the young Jews who are the Arab Jews or the Mizrahi Jews, whose parents and grandparents came from Arab and Islamic and Muslim countries. They are now the power base of the state of Judea. And this is so disappointing because I'm still hoping, as my friend Avi Shleim writes in his book, Three Worlds, that they will be the bridge for building a different kind of free Palestine where Jews, Muslims, and Christians can live together. But right now, the mood of that particular constituency is racist, is anti-Arab, is more theocratic, and they are really digging their own hole in a way, because unlike the European Jews, they don't have dual nationality. They might have jobs that some people might reignite outside, but basically they're going to be stuck in the state of Judea if I'm right that the state of Judea is not going to work. Working in the anti-Zionist left for many years inside Israel, we've never succeeded in finding pathways into this very important constituency. Maybe it's our failure, but that's a fact. We never persuaded them to be part of our vision of a de-Zionized, democratic Israel and Palestine description. And of course, that particular group of white Israelis, so to speak, are the ones who perpetrated the ethnic cleansing of 1948, are the ones who sent the settlers in 1967 to the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. They're the ones who built the foundation for the apartheid state of Israel. And built this image of Israel not being part of the Arab world, but part of Europe. It's pity that the Jews who are part of the Arab world are not seeing what I see clearly, that their future and my future is in Israel and Palestine that is reintegrated to the Arab world, not excluded from the Arab world. It's part of the Arab world's problem, but also part of the Arab world's solution. But I'm not saying there are no individuals who share this vision, but most of them left anyway. And they are not a power to reckon with, unfortunately.
Well,
20 years ago, we had people who used to be part of the Likud party becoming great believers in the two-state solution, like Ehud Olmert, who was the prime minister, and finding counterparts to talk with on the Palestinian Authority side, including Abu Mazen and so on. I'm doubtful, by the way, even if they had succeeded, whether the kind of solution that they were working out, a Palestinian Bantustan plus next to an Israel, would have worked for a long period if it would not have been developed into something better. But at least it was worth a try. It didn't succeed for two reasons. One, that Olmert himself got embroiled in a corruption trial, and he was sent to jail. So he spent his time in jail, so his whole political power base was gone. And secondly, it was too late that most of the Israeli Jewish electorate, well, not most, but a very important part of the Israeli Jewish electorate already moved to the right, already accepted that there are only two options and not three options, namely either a democracy or an ethnic racist state. And in larger numbers, already by 2006, they preferred the racist state to the democracy as an assured way of survival. Mm-hmm. Because rightly so, there's something Vladimir Jabotinsky warned the left already in the early 1920s. If you remember, in his famous manifesto, The Iron Wall, he says the problem with the labor Zionist movement is that it thinks that the Palestinians are stupid and that they can try to cheat them by saying, oh, we want peace, we want to live with you, where actually, like him, they don't want to do that, genuinely, he said. He said it's much better to be honest and say to the Palestinians, either you or we. And he said what was wrong with labor Zionism, that labor Zionism thought that way, but was not honest with the Palestinians, and that, he said, would bring much more trouble in the future. I'm the last person to be a disciple of Jabotinsky, but I think there was something in it. And I think that's what the Israeli electorate felt. They felt like the whole idea of the way Israel explains the two-state solution, the whole idea of Zionism, which is an ethnic, racist ideology, to claim that it can have a liberal version, a socialist version, was a deception. Namely, you first of all deceive yourself, and then you try to deceive others. And it doesn't work. On the ground, it doesn't work. You can never really offer the Palestinians anything that they could, even the feeble Palestinian leadership, could really live with. And we saw it in Oslo and after Oslo. And you are not benefiting in the international community because, yes, the governments are supporting you, but you are losing the support of the civil societies because they can see through that kind of oxymoron of a liberal Zionism, which they translate into liberal colonialism, progressive ethnic cleansing, and so on. So maybe rightly so, I hope they're wrong, a healthy Israeli kind of, not healthy, but a logic, if you want, Israeli Jewish electorate says governments do not work upon moral principles. So they will support us whether we are a democracy or not a democracy if we serve American imperialism, if we serve capitalism, if we serve European interests. Because they're looking around, I mean, the great allies of the West in the global South are not necessarily democracies. So why play the game? I mean, what's the benefit of playing that game? They would call it a game. So we'd rather be united in our right not to be a democracy, to be a Jewish state, a racist state, and hope that we have enough allies who prefer it because they are Islamophobic, because they understand how primitive or bad the Arabs or the Palestinians are. That's the kind of process that I think totally expunged liberal Zionism out of the political game in Israel. It doesn't exist. It started 20 years ago. They totally disappeared. In fact, in the next few elections, they didn't pass the quota for becoming members of parliament even. Those who define themselves as a Zionist left or liberal Zionism. Now, look what they're trying to do in order to survive in the 2026 election. They have put at the head of the liberal Zionist new kind of party that they are building the previous deputy chief of the general staff, a general who was part of the destruction of Gaza between 2007 to 2023. He's now the great hope of the Israeli left. It is incredible if you think about it, you know. Of course supports military action in South Lebanon and so on, but pays lip service to the idea of a two-state solution, according to the Israeli and American version. I think the last nail in that coffin was driven in 2001 when Ariel Sharon was elected. He very cleverly usurped the position of the left. He talked about the need eventually to withdraw from Gaza, appeared as someone who's willing to negotiate a two-state solution, and actually proved to the left that what they believe in, someone who was the epitome of right-wing politics in Israel can also agree to, for the same reasons. A, it's never going to happen. B, it sounds very good to those people in the West who support Israel and want to hear the right music but don't care about the lyrics. And that you can count I'm talking as if I'm representing them, and you can count on the Palestinians to reject it anyway, and therefore they would be blamed for the failure of what happened. And the moment, that he took over the project of liberal Zionism in a way, and Ehud Olmert, who followed him after he got the stroke, killed that option altogether. What he was exposed as was a kind of a propaganda tactics rather than a genuine ideological alternative to Zionism. And maybe it never was. But the lie was only exposed in 2000. I think we can go even to an earlier period. Governments every now and then can take a strategic decision, and then consecutive governments follow by inertia the strategy. They very rarely they reconsider the strategy. You need a fundamental event to convince politicians that they should rock the boat to such an extent that they should change, the previous government's alliance. And the strategic decision that is important here goes back to June 1967. In June 1967, Israel had the 13th government of Israel, which was the most consensual government Israel ever had until then and since then. Every political party, including the non-Zionist Orthodox parties, were represented in this government, the unity government. And it took very important decisions after the occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And not one Israeli prime minister or government deviated until today from the decisions that they have taken. The first one was that Israel cannot exist without controlling the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. They had endless debate, does it mean that you need a direct rule or indirect rule, but it was agreed that Israel would never allow any other force to be present in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. You could be in the service of Israel. It could be the Jordanians, it could be the PLO, it could be even the Hamas, as we have seen in the last years before 2023, that Israel wrongly thought that Hamas was serving its own interests as well. But it's still Israel. It is still part of Israel. The second decision was that they cannot repeat what they have done in 1948, namely, they cannot get rid of the Palestinian population in the massive numbers in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And the third decision that stems from it was that if Israel wants it to be part of Israel and cannot expel massively the population, then it should also be aware that it will never grant them civil rights and human rights or include them in the Israeli state. So for a while it worked, it kind of worked. Oslo was supposed to give an international stamp to that idea and to call it a peace and to call the Palestinian enclaves a state. And it didn't work because of their resistance. And because of the resistance also of the Israeli right that didn't want it. And now you have these messianic new Zionist ministers who believe that there's a new opportunity for doing in Gaza something even better. That is a combination of genocide and ethnic cleansing, and they're still hoping that they can do that. So I think that there was never this moment of truth, where there was a genuine chance from an Israeli perspective to allow for a genuine two-state solution to arise. I don't think so. I'm not saying that individuals might have not wanted it, but the political powers, the best they could offer was really, in this respect, I agree with everyone who uses the Bantustan in apartheid South Africa as a model. The best Israel could offer the Palestinians was Bantustans. This is not the minimum even the feeble Palestinian leadership could have accepted. I'm afraid you have to go back to history just for a moment to understand that. The Hashemites, which was a big clan, arrived in near historical Palestine after the Zionists, not before the Zionists. That's important to remember. So they are also kind of visitors. They are not settler colonial project, but they are people who came from the Arabian Peninsula because they were driven out by the Saudis in the early 1920s. And that's how they found themselves in Jordan and created an alliance with the local tribes who always lived in Jordan and the Christian community that was there for centuries. And the eastern part of Jordan to the Hashemite rulers, when they arrived in the 1920s, did not seem enough for having a viable state. And they always wanted to have at least part of Palestine with its fertile lands, its educated population, in order to give more content for the idea of a state. That people today don't understand that period where you could really dream that you're building from scratch a state because there wasn't a state there before, right? And for that purpose, King Abdullah was the great-grandfather of the present King Abdullah, had a tacit alliance with the Zionist movement. They had similar kind of interest there, that as long as Abdullah would be part of an Arab world that is willing to tolerate the idea of a Jewish state, the Jewish state will help him to solidify a new state in Transjordan that will become Jordan. And this is why during the 48 war, when Jordan could have played a much more important and devastating role as far as Israel is concerned, because it had British officers and good equipment compared to other Arab armies, was very limited in its intervention and was rewarded with the West Bank. So the West Bank from 48 to 67 gave Transjordan, it became Jordan. And when Israel occupied the West Bank in 67, those architects of the occupation of the West Bank were part of the same Israeli leadership that had these traditional relationship with the Hashemites in Jordan. So the first idea of these people was that maybe they can have some sort of collaboration in ruling the West Bank with Jordan that would serve the Israeli interests, namely that the Jordan River would be the border of Israel, but Jordan would help to control the Palestinian population in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. For a while it worked until the first Intifada in 1987. And what in international politics it was called the Jordanian option, namely an Israeli agreement that will gradually give Jordan more and more say in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip in return for bilateral peace. It's formed when the Likud took power, and even that game of allowing the Jordanians to think that they might go back to the West Bank was gone, because the Likud had, even in the Likud charter, even Transjordan is part of the land of Israel. So for them, that's a great concession to allow the Hashemites to be east of the river Jordan. Of course, they would have never let them to be part of the West. And maybe you remember, I don't know if you were there yet, in 1988, the famous speech by King Hussein, crying, really having genuine tears, when he declared that he cedes any connection to the West Bank, giving up the West Bank altogether. The Jordanians played a role in the past that helped the Israelis to take over Palestine. On the other hand, I can see a Jordanian claim that they saved Palestinians as well. And sometimes these contradictory realities are correct as well. Namely, Palestinians who lived in the West Bank were not expelled. That is true. And Palestinians in Jordan did receive Palestinian refugees, and unlike other Arab countries, did offer them citizenship. So it's a complex relationship between Jordan and the PLO. We have the September 1970 massacre of PLO soldiers by the Jordanian regime. But then you have the early 1980s great collaboration between the PLO and King Hussein in trying to present a joint position eventually for a Palestinian state in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. It's a complex relationship, has to do with the history, and had to do with the fact that there was a lot of good relationship in the past, but this is now gone. Why do the Jordanians are still providing that kind of military aid that you mentioned? I think it has less to do with Zionism in Israel. It has to do with the fear that the pro-Western monarchies in the Arab world have from Iran. I don't think it's connected to Israel. I think it's really connected to their sense of vulnerability in the face of political Islamic movements in their own countries that are gaining power, also because of Palestine. So it is connected in a way. But I think that's where we are today.
Islam,
Absolutely.
which has been on the agenda since 1979.
Exactly. They're the only kingdom that seems to be able to deal with it is Qatar, by navigating quite cleverly, one should say, with good relationship with political Islamic groups on the one hand, and as an asset as well. That's unique. That's very unique how they succeeded in having this position. Because if you look at Abu Dhabi and Dubai and the Emirates altogether, they were unable to have this kind of image in the Arab world. Of course, Al Jazeera also. Qatar is embracing all the political options and accepting them as legitimate. No, it's a bit like dynasty. you have the Sharif Hussein, who is the great founder of the dynasty, who is responsible for the sacredness of Mecca and Medina in the last days of the Ottoman Empire. With the help of Lawrence of Arabia, he signs an alliance with Britain and decides to fight alongside the British against the Turks and the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians, right? Now, in return, he was promised by Lawrence in Arabia and other British officials that in return, most of the provinces in the Arab world, in the eastern part of the Arab world, that were part of the Ottoman Empire would become kingdoms for his sons. And two sons were particularly important, the Amir Faisal and Amir Abdallah, who was the great-grandson of King Abdallah Tudel. Now, Faisal was supposed to be the king of Syria. And for a while, Lawrence of Arabia brought him to Damascus, and he created the Greater Syria Kingdom between 1918 and 1920, when the British government decided that its alliance with France is more important than its alliance with the Hashemites, and allowed the French in 1920 to occupy Syria and Lebanon. Faisal was compensated by having the Kingdom of Iraq in 1920. But the Kingdom of Iraq was promised to Abdallah. And what Abdallah did when the Hashemites lost control of Mecca and Medina, he moved with his family and tribesmen from Mecca and Medina all the way, supposedly, to Damascus to fight the French. He never meant to do that. And he stopped in a small Circassian village called Amman and waited to see what the British would do. And eventually Churchill, who was the Secretary of State for Colonies, Winston Churchill, suggested that instead of the British original idea, that Jordan would be part of Palestine, he decided to give that part of Palestine, as he saw it, which were actually part of Syria in the Ottoman world, for a kingdom for the Hashemites. What is interesting that if one can, I saw the reel, I can't find it again, when this tribe of Hashemites went on to Amman, they stopped in Jericho, and it was an American Hollywood filmmaker who made the film of Joshua, and he used that army as, what you call them, extras in the film.
Wow.
In the film. It is still here, and some of the structure that the colonialist empires, Britain and France, built after the First World War are collapsing. The whole structure that was built after the First World War that created Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Palestine, and Iraq is not in a very good shape in its history. And it was an imposition of a nation state, a European idea of what we call the Westphalian nation state. It was a European idea of what a nation state would look like. And it was imposed on a world that lived in a different way. It was a mosaic of sects and ethnocultural groups that knew how to live and let live within an Islamic civilization, within an Islamic world, but one that got better and better in terms of the relationship and the ability to work together for a better future. And that was stopped by the colonial imperialist intervention, because they use these group identities to pit one group against the other, the classical divide and rule idea of colonialism. And then the nation state was sometimes granted to one group as a reward for being an ally of the colonial empire at the expense of the other groups, which increased the alienation. If you think about Lebanon, the French decided, of course, that Lebanese nationalism goes together with Maronites and Christianity, but they were not the majority. There was little in the dish of Lebanese nationalism that was connected to Islam and Arabism. And you see the result. And think about Palestine. There's very little in the idea of a nation state in Palestine that is connected to Palestinians and the Alawites in Syria. And this is all colonialist structures that were sustained by force, dictatorship, authoritarian regimes. But they were challenged in the Arab Spring for the first time, seriously. And I'm not sure that we are beyond the challenges in the future. Medium and even long term. The alternative is to go back to political structures that are very loose and that are enable the recreation of this live and let live mosaic, where collective identities are respected, but they are quite flexible, as they used to be. The boundaries can be quite porous. People can move from, that was the reality in the past. You could move from one collective identity to the other. I suppose it would have to be adapted to the 21st century. One of the important groups would be the group without group, without group identity. This is something that wasn't there, maybe in small cosmopolitical pockets in the big cities. But in general, that might be a far more important phenomenon in the future. But it is possible to go back to the heritage of the pre-colonial Ottoman period with all, in a very careful way, realizing, not romanticizing it, realizing also its negative aspects, but to look at the basic structure that the Ottoman Empire allowed before the rise of the Young Turks in particular, and to say this is the model that inspires our future model, not the European model of nation state. And Pan-Arabism was not built on that. It was also kind of a copy of a European Western model. No, it's something else. It is something else that can be built either in the Greater Syria area first, which is another notion that was very popular during the late Ottoman period. And I think that this is the political structure that would eventually evolve. The only question is, if it evolves through violence and war, it perpetuates kind of intercommunal strifes and so on. But if it is a consensual project, I can give you an example. I'm sure that the future modern Syria, if you take out the Bashar Assad clique, and you allow Alawites, Kurds, Druze, and so many groups you have in Syria, to rebuild a mosaic state where the state does not interfere in the identities of people, it has a much better chance of being transformed with less violence, and it's without romanticizing it and without belittling the teasing problem it would have. It can function much better, much better than the present political setup. And I think Palestine is an important beacon here, an important sample. Because in Palestine in particular, people forget it, in Palestine in particular, Jews, Muslims, and Christians coexisted peacefully until the rise of Zionism. Jews saw themselves as Arabs. They didn't see themselves as Europeans. And there's a need to find a way of recreating it without being romantic about it, namely or nostalgic, by saying, of course, it has to be adapted to the realities of the world, but the principles are it. We shouldn't defend empires, but we should think about a region that has probably some more solid nation states like the Iranians and the Turks. I cannot see Turkey and Iran necessarily disintegrating quickly. Regional powers instead of international powers. and a certain political structure which represents the various groups that we were talking about. Call it a federation, a confederation, call it the United States of the Mashrak. I don't know. I mean, it bears further thinking and exploration. I'm talking about the orientation of where to look for a solution. You know, there is this Jewish saying that people tend to look for the key that they have lost where there is light, but not where they lost the key. We are in the light, but we're not looking for the key. The key is there. That doesn't mean that this is an easy search. It doesn't mean that one doesn't have to explore it further. But I think that this is, both in Palestine and in the Eastern Mediterranean, we wasted decades of looking for solutions based on European Western models that are not working, instead of working on the heritage of that area as an inspiration for future solutions. And that, I think, is a healthy way forward. I spoke in webinars lately. I can't do it physically, to people in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Egypt, even to a group in Yemen, in Saudi Arabia, and not to mention North Africa, to where I speak quite a lot. The young people who are engaged with me are thinking in similar ways. It's not my own idea. I'm not kind of commodifying here my own, brainstorming. It's something that is a conversation for many, many people, because the nation state has disappointed them, has not delivered a good life, better life, and so on. And this is something that Europe sometimes misunderstanding. Maybe Europe should, because it's going to happen in Europe as well. People are not just concerned about individual rights. Collective rights are still important, but they are not important as a sacred issue, but as a comfort zone, as a safe space, as an outlet, a solace, and so on. And something in this process of modernization and imperialism turned a very positive human association into something that is negative to progress, stability, especially when you arm the groups, of course. But the essential idea, I know it in Palestine. I lived there 70 years now. I know in Palestine, the group identity saves people, gives them a reference group. Life is not easy anywhere, neither in West Asia. And the reference group is important. The left taught us that the reference group is a socioeconomic thing, the class. I tend to differ. It's not always class issue. Not the nation, but the group identity. It could be an ethnocultural identity, it could be a religious one. I'm not questioning the class issue. Is very important for me. I'm a leftist. But I think the left tended to overlook the importance of the collective identity for people. And that's where the Israeli Jews would have to fit in if they want to stay. They would have to become an ethnocultural group in West Asia, like all the other ethnocultural groups. They cannot be a nation state, because that doesn't, the area doesn't accept it, it doesn't work internally, and they could renew the life of Jews as they lived before 48, and of course in a much better condition, because we are in the 21st century and we are much more aware of human rights and civil rights than the Ottomans were. We don't want to idealize their record of human rights. But that's the structure that I can see in the future. But first of all, objectively, the place where Jews are not safe right now is Israel. In fact, in the last 76 years since the inception of the State of Israel, the only place where Jews were killed in large numbers was Israel. So if, for me, life, the guarantee for life, is one of the most important proof for an existential issues. So Jews are particularly under danger because they are Jews in Israel, not anywhere else in the world. I'm not saying that there is no anti-Semitism and so on. Secondly, the Israeli state and its policies towards the Palestinians, and this can be proved, had increased anti-Semitism, did not decrease anti-Semitism. The insistence of Israel that Zionism and Judaism are the same allowed a lot of anti-Semites to say, well, what Israel is doing is Jewish. So even if you are a Jew in London who has nothing to do with Israel, you are a Zionist by default because you are a Jew. And therefore, if people feel either knowingly or unknowingly that whatever Israel does irritates them, outrages them, creates animosity to the Jewish state, and the Jewish state claims Judaism and the Jewish state is the same, you can understand why there's such a confusion. And we've seen it last year in Britain. I myself am consultant to some of these cases where citizens here were talking about Jews in a way that, yes, could be interpreted as anti-Semitic, but I can show the court that what they meant is the Israeli soldiers in Gaza. And then the court would say, but why didn't they call them the Israeli soldiers in Gaza? And I would say, because Israel calls them the Jews in Gaza as well. So you can't blame the people. You can, of course, you have to check whether this is racism towards Jews because they are Jews, or this is anger about an army that is genociding people. It's not the same. This is not a racist position to be angry at such a position. So the whole issue of a Jewish state, the whole Zionist project that was meant to solve anti-Semitism has failed to do so on two accounts. It has not become a safe place for the Jews, and it has increased anti-Semitism instead of decreasing it. On the other hand, it is very clear that one of the biggest mistakes of Zionism and the fight against anti-Semitism, to my mind, and I will end up with a conversation I had with some German officials, which will interest you, is the fact that there was an attempt to create a hierarchy of races, to say there is racism and there is anti-Semitism. If you notice, this is a dominant discourse. There's racism and anti-Semitism. It's not the same. No, it is not. And if you fight successfully racism, you fight successfully anti-Semitism. But if you want to separate the fight from the fight against anti-Semitism, you're going to fail. The reason that Germany has special laws about anti-Semitism and special laws about racism is that anti-Semitism is the worst kind of racism because it wants to see the extermination of the Jews. So I said to him, I'm sorry, you're talking about the Nazis, which I hope are not prevalent anymore in Germany. This is a Nazi definition of racism, I said to him. This is not an objective definition of racism. Any form of racism is from I don't want them as neighbors to I want them dead. It doesn't matter what the race, whoever is the object of racism, there is a kind of spectrum of what you wish for those you don't like because of your racism. But Germans really believe in it. Absolutely. And that's why a river to the sea can get you into jail. It makes sense, exactly. But the fact that Germany sells itself as the world expert on anti-Semitism is ridiculous. They know nothing about it. But it is very important to explain to people that the reason anti-Semitism is not resolved by a Jewish state in the Arab world is, first of all, because it is done at the expense of the Palestinians, so it could never work well. And secondly, because you need to be part of a global struggle against racism wherever it is. It's like the essence of politics. The more the politics would be based on moral values, reflecting of real and genuine people's concern, the better it is for Palestine, and the worse it is for Israel. Israel benefits from a cynical political system with politicians who are much more concerned about the future and see the electorate as a base, not as a group of people whose problem they were elected to solve. This benefits Palestinians with their lack of power depend on politics that derives from moral values, from senses of justice and injustice, all things that my colleagues in the Department of Political Science and the universities of Britain tell the students to forget about if they want to enter politics, which is very sad. But I do think that there's a younger generation there. We saw it in the struggle against global warming. They do believe that justice, morality are part of life and not just utopian and idealistic, stupid dimensions of politics. And I think that is something that would help Palestine, but to my mind will also help the struggle against anti-Semitism.